Friday, and rather than slowing, the news continues to flow in. Here's our insider, Darren Dreger, with senior hockey reporter Frank Saravalli. Darren, the Habs have thrown out a lot of cash to improve up front, over $55 million on UFA Tyler Toffoli and Josh Anderson, who they acquired via trade. But there's one Canadiens forward who's still left wanting.
Yeah, and that's veteran Brendan Gallagher going into the final year of his contract with the Montreal Canadiens. Now, Gino, up until, I would say, a month ago, if you'd have questioned the future of Gallagher in Montreal, I'd have said, no. He's a long-time fit, long-term fit, and probably the next captain for the Montreal Canadiens. But contract negotiations haven't gone as expected. Up until recently, there was good dialogue. But as you mentioned, the Canadiens acquired Josh Anderson. They signed Tyler Toffoli, and all of a sudden now Marc Bergevin is playing hardball with Brendan Gallagher's camp. Now, granted, he is going into the final year of his contract, so Bergevin does have the better part of that year to figure it out. But I can tell you guys, this has sparked trade speculation. Some openly and fairly wondering whether or not Bergevin now will consider trading Brendan Gallagher or use his services for the remainder of the year. No matter how it shakes down, there will be no shortage of teams or interest if Brendan Gallagher hits the market.
And Dregs, you could put the Vancouver Canucks right at the very top of that list of teams that would be interested in Brendan Gallagher if and when he makes it to the block in Montreal to bring Gallagher home. Of course, he makes his offseason home there, starred for the Vancouver Giants, and more than that, the Canucks at large are interested in a winger, and GM Jim Benning, after acquiring defenseman Nate Schmidt on Monday night from the Vegas Golden Knights, is certainly perusing the market for both trade targets and also the free agent market to try and figure out how he can add some punch to his team on the wing. I think it all depends on cost. I think the Canucks at this point have some ability to move out some contracts, whether it's Louis Eriksson or Brandon Sutter. Who knows what happens with Jake Virtanen, the restricted free agent. So Jim Benning has some flexibility now, and it all is going to depend on cost. And so they could go back in a budget item with a guy like Josh Levo, but moving forward, I think Jim Benning would like to make one more splash if he could this offseason.
Frank, you put out a list of the top 100 available UFAs last week. At last count, almost half of them are still looking for contracts. Darren, we knew the flat cap was going to be a problem, but is it even worse than we initially thought?
It feels that way, certainly to those player agents who are still in the mud, and likewise their clients, the players. I mean, you're right, most of the big-name guys are now off the board, but I'll give you an example of how paralyzed the system is right now. I can give an example of a player who was making between $3 and $4 million last year, a very good player who's had teams offer a one-year deal at $1 million or less. So teams are value shopping, if you want to put it that way, which is being polite. They're looking for a steal of the deal, and that is not sitting well with the player agents or the players, appreciably, understandably, to the point where there's some grumbling and looking back in hindsight of what could have been included in the CBA. Why didn't they pursue a franchise exemption for a player so every team could have that one guy? Or looking at some of the other things like simply raising the cap floor, not the ceiling, the cap floor. But most of this is predictable, and the system is where it's at, and most expected it would get there.
And one player who's held firm on his value and his belief is Mike Hoffman, who's somewhere probably between $5.5 and $6.5 million on a one-year deal, a guy who averages 27 goals a season. He can be had on that one-year deal, and the teams that are most interested at this point, the number 5 free agent available on our board this year would be the Boston Bruins, the Columbus Blue Jackets, and also the Nashville Predators. But other teams like the Habs, like the Canucks, could be in the mix if they're able to move pieces.
The Cup champs have been doing some serious cap clearing. When they struggled to move Tyler Johnson, they even tried to waive him. Frank, he's got 4 years left at $5 million per season. What's the latest on that front?
Well, there's been some increased flexibility, Gino, with the Johnson camp and the Tampa Bay Lightning. He's expanded his list of available teams that he would accept a trade to from 5 to 8. They're willing to accept some other suggestions as well from the Lightning in order to best facilitate a move and help get the Lightning out of cap jail. But at this point, the Lightning are going to have to swallow hard here and be prepared to make a trade, much like the Vegas Golden Knights did previously with Paul Stastny and Nate Schmidt. perhaps even including a draft pick to move on from Tyler Johnson, or one of the number of other players that they would consider doing so, including Alex Killorn, Yanni Gourde, number of players. But the real hang-up in Tampa Bay, Gino, is that all of those players, with the exception of Killorn, who has a modified no trade, is that they hold all the cards like Johnson does with full no trade moves.